Hello and welcome back to part 8 of this Antichrist series. In this video, we'll continue to look at the religion of Islam and how they understand their end times prophecies from their holy book, the Quran. In my last video, part 7 of this series, we looked at the Islamic version of the Antichrist known as Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, which literally means the fraudulent Jesus or the lying Messiah. We also saw how the Muslims are awaiting their Mahdi or their awaited Savior. Not only that, but the Muslims are also awaiting the return of Jesus, whom they call Isa. So let's pick up where we left off. The first and most cited Islamic belief with regard to the Mahdi is the tradition that states that the Mahdi will descend from the family of Muhammad and will bear Muhammad's name. One of the Islamic hadiths regarding the Mahdi has Muhammad saying, "The world will not come to pass until a man from among my family, whose name will be my name, rules over the Arabs." Muhammad also said, "The Mahdi will be of my family, of the descendants of Fatima," who is Muhammad's daughter. Throughout the Islamic world today, there is a call for the restoration of the Islamic Caliphate. The Khalifa in Islam may be viewed somewhat as the Pope of the Muslims. Muslims view the Caliph as the vice-regent for Allah on the earth. It's important to understand that when Muslims call for the restoration of the Caliphate, it is ultimately the Mahdi that they call for. For the Mahdi is the awaited final Caliph of Islam. Muslims everywhere will be obligated to follow the Mahdi. For the Quran says, "If you see him, go and give him your allegiance, even if you have to crawl over ice, because he is the vice-regent Khalifa of Allah, the Mahdi. He will pave the way for and establish the government of the family or community of Muhammad. Every believer will be obligated to support him." The Mahdi is believed to be a future Muslim world leader who will not only rule over the Islamic world, but the non-Muslim world as well. The Mahdi is said to lead a world revolution that will establish a new Islamic world order throughout the entire earth. According to Islam, the Mahdi will establish right and justice in the world and eliminate evil and corruption. He will fight against the enemies of the Muslims. He will reappear on the appointed day, and then he will fight against the forces of evil, lead a world revolution, and set up a new world order based on justice, righteousness, and virtue. Ultimately, the righteous will take the world administration in their hands, and Islam will be victorious over all religions. He is the precursor of the victory of the truth and the fall of all tyrants. He heralds the end of injustice and oppression and the beginning of the final rising of the Sun of Islam, which will never again set and which will ensure happiness and the elevation of mankind. The Mahdi is one of Allah's clear signs which will soon be made evident to everyone. The Mahdi's means and method of accomplishing this world revolution will include multiple military campaigns or holy wars called jihad. While some Muslims believe that most of the non-Muslims of the world will convert to Islam peacefully during the reign of the Mahdi, most traditions picture the non-Muslim world coming to Islam as a result of conquest by the Mahdi. Abdul Raham Kalani, author of The Last Apocalypse, describes the many battles of the Mahdi. It says this in his book, "Al-Mahdi will receive a pledge of allegiance as a caliph for Muslims. He will lead Muslims in many battles of jihad. His reign will be a caliphate that follows the guidance of the Prophet. Many battles will ensue between Muslims and disbelievers during the Mahdi's reign." Even Haran Yahya, see a picture of him here, a moderate and very popular Muslim author, refers to the Mahdi's invasion of numerous non-Muslim lands as the Mahdi will invade all the places between East and West. The Mahdi's ascendancy to power is said to be preceded by an army from the east carrying black flags or banners of war. Sheikh Kabani states, "Hadith indicates that black flags coming from the area of Khorasan will signify that the appearance of the Mahdi is nigh." Greater Khorasan is a large territory that includes most of northern Afghanistan and northeastern Iran. Some Muslim scholars have said that this hadith means that when the black flags appear from Central Asia in the direction of Khorasan, then the appearance of the Mahdi is imminent. Just recently in the news regarding the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan as of August 29, 2021, one news article stated, "Fear and chaos spread in Kabul on Sunday, August 1st, after the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. After the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, the Taliban brought a decisive end to the country's 20-year war. After U.S. President Joe Biden announced the withdrawal of his troops from Afghanistan, the Taliban began wreaking havoc on Afghan civilians. They captured one provincial capital after another in a matter of days. In the end, only Kabul remained the last major city under the control of the Afghan government, but on Sunday, Taliban rulers attacked and captured the city. The Taliban overthrew the Afghan government and forced President Ashraf Ghani to flee the country. Since then, the Taliban have been terrorizing the whole of Afghanistan. Many Muslims might see this takeover in Afghanistan as some fulfillment of their Quran prophecies. Here's a recent picture of the Taliban in Afghanistan with their white flags. Just a little bit of history about the flags of Islam. Black flags were used as early as Muhammad in the 7th century as a way of identifying the corps of the army during war. Today, Muslim extremists use a solid black flag to represent themselves and call the flag either the Black Banner or the Black Standard. Jihadists such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda use the black flag with the addition of white script called the Shahada, an Arabic phrase that states that there is only one God with only one messenger, Muhammad. Here's a picture of the new Afghanistan flag here. Interestingly, Afghanistan has had 25 flags since the first flag when the Hotak dynasty was established in the year 1709. During the 20th century alone, Afghanistan went through 19 national flags, more than any other country during that time period, and most of them had the colors black, red, and green. An Islamic flag is a flag either representing an Islamic denomination or religious order, state, civil society, military force, or other entity associated with Islam. Islamic flags have a distinct history due to the Islamic prescription on aniconism. Aniconism was shaped in monotheistic religions by theological considerations. It emerged as a corollary of seeing God's position as the ultimate power holder, and the need to defend this unique status against competing external and internal forces such as pagan idols and critical humans. Idolatry was seen as a threat to uniqueness, and one way that prophets and missionaries chose to fight it was through the prohibition of physical representations. Since the time of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, flags with certain colors were associated with Islam according to the traditions. Since then, historical caliphates, modern nation-states, certain denominations as well as religious movements have adopted flags to symbolize their Islamic identity. During the Abbasid Revolution, the Abbasids incorporated the black standard based on the early Islamic eschatological saying that a people coming from the east with black banners would herald the arrival of the messianic figure, the Mahdi. White is perhaps the second most associated color with Islam. The color white symbolizes purity and peace, and so it is often worn by Muslims attending Friday prayers. Muslims also wear it when performing sacred rites of pilgrimage. The Umayyads chose white for their battle standards when they fought the Abbasid during the Caliphate period, and it has appeared on many Islamic flags since then. The color most strongly associated with Islam is the color green because it has represented Islam for centuries. Many Islamic countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran feature the color green on their national flags. Some believe that green was the Prophet Muhammad's favorite color, and it is mentioned in a number of verses in the Quran as the color that will be worn by the inhabitants of paradise. During the period of the Islamic Caliphate, warring factions took on certain colors to represent themselves. When the Abbasid Caliphate revolted against the Umayyads, they wore black clothing and carried black battle standards, as it was thought that the coming of the Messiah would be signified by a man with a black banner. Today in Iran, devout Shiite women wear black chador and ayatollahs wear black cloaks, while certain descendants of the Prophet Muhammad wear black turbans. On the surface, associated Islamists and jihadists belonging to different terror organizations and groups may appear to be furthering their own goals, but in reality they are all striving towards bringing the entire world under one Islamic caliph. Besides, it's not just the white or black flags that represent jihadi groups with the aim of establishing Islamic caliphates. Other flags, for example, Turkey's flag, inspired from the Ottoman Empire's flag, is red in color. Similarly, green is another color that comes up a lot in Islamic history. It was the color of the flag of the Fatimid Caliphate, the last of the 4 Arab caliphates. Whatever be the color of the flag, white, black, red, or green, the mentality remains the same, establishing the supremacy of Islam, and so does the threat to non-Muslims who are considered as fair game by the jihadists to be forcefully converted, oppressed, persecuted, and killed in order to achieve their objective of creating an Islamic caliphate. The messenger of Allah said, "The black banners will come from the east, and their hearts will be as firm as iron. Whoever hears of them should join them and give allegiance, even if it means crawling across snow." Islam waves 2 flags, one is white and one is black. Written across both flags in Arabic are the words, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." The white flag is called al-Liwa and serves as the sign for the leader of the Muslim army and is the flag of the Islamic State. The black flag is called ar-Raya and is used by the Muslim army. It is also called the flag of jihad and is carried into battle. One flag is governmental and the other is military. When Muhammad returned to his home city of Mecca after 8 years of exile, he returned as a conqueror. With him marched 10,000 Muslim soldiers. They carried with them black flags. On the flags was one word written in Arabic: punishment. Islamic tradition pictures the Mahdi as joining the army of Muslim warriors carrying black flags. The Mahdi will lead this army to Israel and reconquer it for Islam. The Muslims will slaughter Jews until very few remain, and Jerusalem will serve as the location of the Mahdi's rule over the earth. Muhammad said, "Armies carrying black flags will come from Khorasan. No power will be able to stop them, and they will finally reach Ella, Baitul Maqdas, where they will erect their flags." The reference to Baitul Maqdas, in Arabic, this means the Holy House. This is referring to the Dome of the Rock Mosque located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In a particularly venomous manner, Egyptian authors Muhammad ibn Izzat and Muhammad Arif comment on this tradition. In their book, they say, "The Mahdi will be victorious and eradicate those pigs and dogs and the idols of this time so that there will once more be a caliphate based on prophethood as the Hadith states. Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi." Imam is a title used of Muslim leaders. That will abolish the leadership of the Jews and put an end to the domination of the Satans who spit evil into people and cause corruption in the earth, making them slaves of false idols and ruling the world by laws other than the Sharia law of the Lord of the worlds. A very famous tradition often quoted throughout the Islamic world speaks of the Mahdi's military campaign against Israel. The tradition is both sickening and very sobering. The Prophet said, "The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims will kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, 'Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.'" It is said that the Mahdi will have control over the wind and the rain and the crops. Under the Mahdi's rule, the world will live in prosperity. Islamic tradition relates that Muhammad once said, "In the last days of my Ummah, or universal Islamic community, the Mahdi will appear. Allah will give him power over the wind, and the rain and the earth will bring forth its foliage. He will give away wealth profusely. Flocks will be in abundance, and the Ummah will be large and honored. In those years, my community will enjoy a time of happiness such as they have never experienced before. Heaven will send rain upon them in torrents. The earth will not withhold any of its plants, and wealth will be available to all. A man will stand and say, "Give to me, Mahdi," and he will say, "Take." As a result of the numerous benefits that the Mahdi brings, it is said that all the inhabitants of the earth will deeply love him. Allah will sow love of him in the hearts of all people. Al-Mahdi appears, everyone only talks about him, drinks the love of him, and never talks about anything other than him. While there is more than one tradition regarding the nature and timing of the Mahdi's ascendancy to power, one particular hadith places this event at the time of a final peace agreement between the Arabs and the Romans. The word Romans here refers to Christians, or more generally to the West. Although this peace agreement is made with the Romans, it is presumably mediated through a Jew from the priestly lineage of Aaron. The peace agreement will be made for a period of 7 years. Rasulullah Muhammad said, "There will be 4 peace agreements between you and the Romans, Christians. The 4th agreement will be mediated through a person who will be from the progeny of Hadrat Harun, which means Honorable Aaron, Moses' brother, and will be upheld for 7 years. It appears that the period of this 7-year peace agreement will likewise be the period of the Mahdi's reign. While a few traditions specify that the Mahdi will reign on the earth for as much as 8 or possibly even 9 years, most traditions state that his reign will last for 7 years. Muhammad said, "He will divide the property and will govern the people by the Sunnah and their prophet and establish Islam on the earth. He will remain 7 years, then die, and the Muslims will pray over him." Muhammad said, "The Mahdi will fill the earth with equity and justice as it was filled with oppression and tyranny, and he will rule for 7 years." The Mahdi is believed to ride on a white horse. Whether or not this is symbolic or literal is hard to say. Quite interestingly, this tradition comes from a Muslim interpretation of Christian scriptures. Despite the fact that Muslims view the Bible as changed and corrupted by the Jews and Christians, they claim to believe that some portions of the original inspired books remain within the corrupted Bible. A tradition within Islam scholarship seeks to extract those portions of the Bible that Muslims feel may be untainted by the corrupting influence of the Jews and Christians. Muslims call these Judeo-Christian traditions Israeliyat. One such transmitter of biblical traditions is Muslim scholar Kabal Abar, viewed among Muslims as a trustworthy transmitter of hadith as well as Israeliyat. Kabal Abar's view that this description of the rider on the white horse as found in the book of Revelation is indeed the Mahdi is supported by 2 well-known Egyptian authors, Muhammad ibn Izzat and Muhammad Arif, in their book Al-Mahdi and the End of Time. They quote Kabal Abar as saying, "I find the Mahdi recorded in the books of the prophets. For instance, the book of Revelation says, 'And I saw, and behold, a white horse. He that sat on him went forth conquering and to conquer.'" Izzat and Arif then go on to say, "It is clear that this man is the Mahdi who will ride the white horse and judge by the Quran with justice, and with whom will be men with marks of prostration on their foreheads, marks on their foreheads from bowing in prayer with their head to the ground 5 times daily." So Muslims admit freely that they have borrowed this idea of the Mahdi riding on a white horse directly from the Bible and applied it not to Jesus Christ, but to their concept of this Mahdi. Some claim that this is the reason Saddam Hussein painted numerous murals all over Baghdad portraying himself as a Muslim knight on a white horse. See a picture of that here, with sword drawn, doing valiant battle against the infidels. In one final very interesting series of traditions regarding the Mahdi, we find that he is said to produce some previously undiscovered Bible scrolls, even the Ark of the Covenant itself. Kabal Abar says he will be called Mahdi because he will guide to something hidden and will bring out the Torah and Gospel from a town called Antioch. As Suyuti mentioned in his book Al-Hawi, you see a picture of that book here, that the messenger of Allah said He is called the Mahdi because he will guide the people to a mountain in Syria from which he will bring out the volumes of the Torah to refute the Jews. At the hands of the Mahdi, the Ark of the Covenant will be brought forth from the lake of Tiberias and taken and placed in Jerusalem. He will bring forth the volumes of the Torah with which to argue against the Jews, and at his hands a group of them will become Muslim. Apparently, the purpose of finding these lost portions of the Old and New Testaments, as well as the Ark of the Covenant, is to help the Mahdi win converts from both Christianity and Judaism prior to eradicating the remainder who do not convert to Islam. In summary, after reviewing the various Islamic traditions and opinions of the Muslim scholars, let's now review and walk through a list of what we've learned about the person and the mission of the Mahdi as he exists in the minds of almost 2 billion Muslims worldwide. Remember, this is the man that Muslims of the world eagerly await. So I'll put that list up here. You can see number 1, it says the Mahdi is Islam's primary Messiah figure. Number 2, he will be a descendant of Muhammad and will bear Muhammad's name. 3, he will be a very devout Muslim. 4, he will be an unparalleled spiritual, political, and military world leader. Number 5, he will emerge after a period of great turmoil and suffering upon the earth. 6, he will establish justice and righteousness throughout the world and eradicate tyranny and oppression. 7, he will be Caliph and Imam of the Muslims worldwide. 8, he will lead a world revolution and establish a new world order. 9, he will lead military action against all those who oppose him. 10, he will invade many countries. 11, he will make a 7-year peace treaty with a Jew of priestly lineage. Number 12, he will conquer Israel for Islam and lead the faithful Muslims in a final slaughter against the Jews. 13, he will establish the new Islamic world headquarters from Jerusalem. 14, he will rule for 7 years. 15, he will cause Islam to be the only religion practiced on the earth. 16, he will appear riding on a white horse. 17, he will discover some previously undiscovered biblical manuscripts that he will use to argue with the Jews and cause some Jews to convert to Islam. 18, he will also rediscover the Ark of the Covenant from the Sea of Galilee, which he will bring to Jerusalem. 19, he will have supernatural power from Allah over the wind and the rain and crops. 20, he will possess and distribute enormous amounts of wealth. 21, he will be loved by all the people of the earth. From our studies so far in this series on the Antichrist, we have seen from the Bible prophecies that the Antichrist will be a political and military leader with power unparalleled by any other world leader throughout history. The Mahdi is said to fight against the forces of evil, lead a world revolution, and set up a new world order based on justice, righteousness, and virtue. At this time, according to Islamic tradition, the Mahdi is said to preside over the entire earth as the final Caliph of Islam. Muslims will take the world administration in their hands, and Islam will be victorious over all religions. Without question, Islam views the Mahdi as one whose rule will extend over all the earth. Clearly then, we see that the Antichrist and the Mahdi are both described as political and military leaders, the likes of which the world has never before seen. While many powerful leaders have arisen throughout world history, the descriptions given concerning both the Antichrist and the Mahdi surpass any that have yet arisen. But the Mahdi and the Antichrist are both described as more than merely political and military leaders. They are both viewed as supreme religious leaders as well. The Bible establishes the fact that the Antichrist will be a spiritual leader whose authority will be acknowledged worldwide. After examining the Antichrist's role as a universal religious leader, many Bible prophecy teachers have talked about the coming of the one world religion, or the false church, which the Antichrist will both create and enforce upon the entire earth. This concept of a coming dominant and demonically inspired world religion is partly arrived at due to the frequent references to worship associated with the Antichrist throughout Scripture. In the book of Revelation, we read that the Antichrist will both inspire and demand worship. This worship will be directed at both Satan, referred to as the dragon, and the Antichrist, referred to as the beast. You can find that referenced in Revelation, the 13th chapter, verses 4 through 8, it says, "Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshipped the beast and asked, 'Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?' All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world." Beyond the fact that the Antichrist establishes a worldwide worship movement, another reason to see him as a spiritual world leader is because the Bible says a man referred to as the false prophet will assist him. Of course, the very title false prophet assumes the religious nature of this man. One of the primary roles of the false prophet is to perform deceptive signs and wonders that will help persuade the inhabitants of the earth to worship the Antichrist beast. Revelation 19:20 says, "But the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf." It's clear then that the Bible teaches that the Antichrist will lead a worldwide religious worship movement that will attempt to displace and usurp the worship from God of the Bible. This worship will then be directed toward both himself and Satan, the puppet master that motivates, empowers, and gives authority to the Antichrist to accomplish his worldwide task. Likewise, it almost goes without saying, the Mahdi of Islam will be the leader of a worldwide worship movement. A worship movement that will seek to cause anyone who practices any religion other than Islam to renounce his faith and worship Allah, the God of Islam. As we learned, according to Islam, the Mahdi will govern the people by the Sunnah of their prophet and establish Islam on the earth. And Islam will be victorious over all the religions. So we see that the Mahdi leads a world revolution that will institute a new world order based on the religion of Islam. Islam will be the only religion allowed. Both the Antichrist and the Mahdi are said to be the unqualified leaders of a global religious movement that will draw worship away from the God of the Bible and his Son, Jesus Christ. Inherent in the worship of Allah within the context of Islam is a direct denial of the God of the Bible and his Son, Jesus Christ. In fact, this is the reason that some Muslims feel so strongly as to say that the Mahdi will eradicate those pigs and dogs, referring to the Christians and the Jews who refuse to convert to Islam. Which leads us to the next obvious similarity between the Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Bible is very clear that Satan through the Antichrist will specifically target first Jews and then Christians for death. In Revelation chapters 12 and 13, we read another prophetic message of Scripture rich with symbolic language. Initially, it is slightly difficult to understand, but after the symbols are explained, it becomes very clear. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1 says, "A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." The woman here symbolically pictured is the family or nation of Israel, the Jewish people. We see that she is crowned with 12 stars. This represents the 12 sons of Israel, who became the 12 tribes that make up the family, or the nation of Israel as mentioned in Genesis chapter 35, 21 through 26. Revelation chapter 12, verse 2 through 5 says, speaking of this woman, "She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his heads. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne." The woman Israel becomes pregnant and gives birth to a male child who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. This is a clear reference to Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. The dragon mentioned here is identified in verse 9 as that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. We see that Satan desires to kill Jesus, but instead Jesus is snatched up to God and to his throne. This is a reference to Jesus' ascension to heaven after the resurrection. Then Revelation 12 goes on, verses 6 through 17. It says, "The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. He, the dragon, pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. We see that Satan is enraged at the woman, Israel, and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Israel's other offspring, of course, are those Christians who indeed obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This is the only passage that makes specific reference to Satan making a direct target of both Jews and Christians. And we know that this passage speaks specifically of the end times because it mentions twice the 3½ year period, a time, times, and half a time, that the Antichrist will have authority to war against the saints. That's mentioned in Revelation, the 13th chapter, verses 5 through 7, where it says, "The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them, and he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation." The prophet Daniel also saw the Antichrist would have his authority to wage a successful war against the saints. Saints is also translated holy ones in some translations. It speaks primarily of the true followers of Jesus who know and serve the one true God, Yahweh. Daniel chapter 7:25 says, "He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time." Again, here we see the reference to the 3½ year period when the Antichrist will persecute those who resist him. The Bible is clear, then, that the Antichrist will specifically target those who resist his attempts to establish his religion all over the earth. From the book of Revelation, as well as the prophet Daniel, we see that the 2 groups that most enrage Satan are the Jews and the Christians. Interestingly enough, Islamic tradition speaks much of the Mahdi's special calling to convert Christians and Jews to Islam, yet speaks very little specifically of conversions from other faiths. It seems as though converting Christians and Jews to Islam will be the primary evangelistic thrust of the Mahdi. The following quote from Ayatollah Ibrahim Amini clearly articulates this vision. Here he says, "The Mahdi will offer the religion of Islam to the Jews and Christians. If they accept it, they will be spared. Otherwise, they will be killed." And of course, we cannot forget the infamous hadith that has become a favorite of many Muslim anti-Semites. Again, note that it is speaking specifically about the last hour. The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims will kill them until the Jews hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, "Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him." But the tree Garkad would not say, for it is the tree of the Jews. After commenting on this particular hadith, several Muslim authors will quickly point out the very interesting fact that this particular tree, the Garkad, apparently is the boxwood tree, is presently being planted in abundance by Jews in Israel. The point is that Muslims expect this final Holocaust to take place within the present state of Israel. This, of course, corresponds to another very specific similarity between the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Bible teaches that the Antichrist with his multi-nation coalition will attack Israel and specifically Jerusalem to conquer it. In Zechariah chapter 14 it says, "Behold, the day of Yahweh is coming when your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half the city will go out into captivity, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city." Also Ezekiel chapter 38, 9 through 12 speaks of that. It says, "You," speaking of Gog, will advance. You will come like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your hordes and many peoples with you. This is what the Lord Yahweh says. In that day things will come into your mind, and you will plan an evil plan, and you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will go up against those who are at rest, who live securely, all of them living without walls and having no bars or gates. To take the spoil and to take the plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places that are now inhabited, and against the people who have not been gathered out of the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who live in the center of the land. According to the Bible, after this attack, the Antichrist will specifically set up his throne in God's temple. The Apostle Paul lays this out quite clearly in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. The location of the Jewish temple has always been on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Today, the temple that once stood on Mount Moriah does not exist. It was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus in AD 70, according to the prophecy of Jesus. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Matthew 24, 1-2, he says, Do you see all these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Today, Mount Moriah, sometimes known as the Temple Mount, or in Arabic as Haram Ash-Sharif, is the location of two mosques and the third holiest site of Islam. There is endless speculation about the Temple Mount regarding issues such as exactly where the Jewish temple once stood on the mount, or whether or not a rebuilt Jewish temple will rise there in the future. The verse from the Apostle Paul certainly seems to indicate that a rebuilt Jewish temple will indeed appear in Jerusalem in the future. The Apostle Paul says that the Antichrist will set himself up in God's temple, or more literally, he takes his seat in the temple of God. This speaks of a literal sitting down and represents taking a position of authority. Thus we see that the Antichrist will make Mount Moriah, and more specifically the rebuilt Jewish temple, the specific location of his rule. Jesus warned of this event 2,000 years ago, referring to the Antichrist having set himself up in the Jewish temple, and the events that will immediately follow. Jesus said, Matthew chapter 24, starting in verse 16, So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of his house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for a pregnant woman and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Here we see Jesus referring to the Antichrist's occupancy of the temple as the abomination that causes desolation. The desolation refers to the chaos and severe persecution against the Jews and Christians that will immediately follow when the Antichrist's true identity is revealed. After his military campaign against Jerusalem, the Antichrist will make his base of authority the Temple Mount itself. At this time, it's clear that the Antichrist's malevolent feelings towards Israel will become fully manifest, so much so that Jesus warns the inhabitants of Jerusalem to straightway flee to the mountains. Likewise, the Mahdi is said to attack Jerusalem and reconquer it for Islam in order to establish Islamic rule over the earth from Jerusalem, where they say armies carrying black flags will come from Khorasan, Iran. No power will be able to stop them, and they will finally reach Elah, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where they will erect their flags. Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi. Also, we just saw that the Mahdi will not end his campaign against Jerusalem in a peaceful way. For the Jews, the Islamic version of the last days ends with the last few remaining Jews hiding behind rocks or trees from the sword of Islam. The military campaign against Jerusalem and the establishment of the Islamic Caliphate there likewise will not result in a benevolent rule over the Jews by the Mahdi, for as we've already seen, the last quote continues, that will abolish the leadership of the Jews and put an end to the domination of the Satans who spit evil into people and cause corruption in the earth. In relation to the attack against the inhabitants of Israel, there is quite interestingly another very specific correlation between the actions of the Mahdi and the actions of the biblical Antichrist. While the similarities between the Antichrist and the Mahdi that we have already discussed are astonishing, I believe that the specificity of this next parallel is simply incredible. After rising to power and as a prelude to his invasion of Israel, the Antichrist is said to initiate a treaty with the nation of Israel for 7 years. Most Christians are familiar with this verse in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, where it says, "He, the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him." In context, this verse shows us that the Antichrist will establish a covenant with Israel for 7 years, giving the Israelis a false sense of security. The specific Hebrew word used in this verse translated as 7 is shabuah. It means a week, but can mean either a week of days or years. In Hebrew thought, a 7-year period is similar to our decade. We in the West tend to measure years through a decimal system based on increments of tens, while we measure days in terms of 7 or a week. The Hebrews measured both days and years in increments of 7. The word translated as 7 in Daniel 9 here refers to 7 years. This is the specific amount of time that the Antichrist will set for his peace treaty with Israel. Then in the middle of the 7 years, the Antichrist will renege on his treaty and stop the offerings and sacrifices in the Jewish temple. And then he will proclaim himself not only the ruler of the world, but God himself. Isaiah the prophet makes mention of this covenant and rebukes Israel for making it in the 28th chapter of Isaiah, where he actually refers to it as a covenant with death. Again, similarly, the Mahdi is said to initiate Islam's fourth and final treaty between the Romans and Muslims. Again, Romans should be interpreted as Christians or the West in general. The executioners of Nicholas Berg, in their pre-execution statement, addressed President Bush as, "You, O dog of Romans." Here's a picture of Nicholas Berg. Nicholas Berg was an American freelance radio tower repairman who went to Iraq after the United States invasion of Iraq. He was abducted and beheaded according to a video released in May 2004 by Islamist militants in response to the Abu Ghraib torture and prisoner abuse involving the United States Army and Iraqi prisoners. Interestingly enough, this fourth treaty is said to be made with the descendants of Moses' brother Aaron the priest. Such a descendant would be a Cohen, that is to say, he would be a priest. Only Kohanim among Jews can officiate the priestly duties of the temple. This is important in light of the fact that many Christian prophecy teachers and theologians have speculated that the treaty that the Antichrist will initiate with Israel will include an agreement to allow the Jews to rebuild their temple. But probably the most amazing aspect of this treaty that the Mahdi makes is its time frame. The specific time frame given for the treaty is exactly the same as the Antichrist peace treaty, 7 years. Citing hadiths that speak of the Mahdi's emergence and rule, Muhammad Ali ibn Zubair relates this amazing tradition. He says, "The Prophet said, 'There will be 4 peace agreements between you and the Romans. The 4th will be mediated through a person who will be from the progeny of Hadrat Aaron, Honorable Aaron, the brother of Moses, and will be upheld for 7 years. The people asked, 'O Prophet Muhammad, who will be Imam, leader of the people at that time?' The Prophet said, 'He will be from my progeny and will be exactly 40 years of age. His face will shine like a star.'" Another of the Antichrist's goals, according to the book of Daniel, is to change the set times and the laws. Daniel 7:25, where he says, "He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. This is actually quite a glimpse into the person of the Antichrist, for by his actions we see a hint of his origin. It is said that he will desire to change two things, the times and the laws. Now we've already seen that the Mahdi will change the law by instituting Islamic Sharia law all over the earth, but we have not seen any evidence in Islamic apocalyptic literature of him changing the times. The simple question, however, is who else other than a Muslim would desire to change times and the laws? Besides the Gregorian calendar used by the West, there are also Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim calendars, among others. Jews and Hindus, however, would not desire to impose their religious laws or calendars onto the rest of the world. Islam, however, has both its own laws and its own calendar, both of which would desire to impose on the entire world. The Islamic calendar is based on the career of Muhammad. It begins at the migration or hijrah of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. The Muslim calendar is mandatory for all Muslims to observe. Dr. Walid Mahana articulates the Islamic position regarding the Islamic Hijrah calendar, where he says it is considered a divine command to use a Hijrah calendar with 12 purely lunar months without intercalation, as evident from the Holy Quran. Not only does Islam view as a divine imperative the use of a unique religious calendar, it also has its own week. Unlike the Western rhythm of a week, Monday through Friday being the body of the work week followed by Saturday and Sunday as the weekend, with Judaism and Christianity using those 2 days for their respective days of worship, Islam holds Friday as its sacred day of prayer. This is the day that Muslims meet at the mosque to pray and listen to a sermon. So it's quite plausible that the biblical reference to the Antichrist who will try to change the set times and laws describes a Muslim. As we look at the full picture, only Islam fits the bill of a system that has its own unique calendar, a week based on its own religious history, and a clear system of law that it wishes to impose onto the entire earth. Surely if a Muslim ever emerges as powerful as the Mahdi, he will attempt to institute Islamic law worldwide and the Islamic calendar and week as well. The final similarity between the Antichrist and the Mahdi that we will look at in this video is the fact that both the Antichrist and the Mahdi are identified with a biblical passage that describes a rider on a white horse. While this could be literal, it's most probably a symbolic picture of the two men. The amazing thing is that the origin of the biblical tradition of the Antichrist on a white horse and the origin of the Islamic tradition of the Mahdi on a white horse come from the same passage in the Bible. The basis for the symbolic picture of both the Antichrist and the Mahdi on a white horse is the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. Here the Apostle John describes his vision of the release of the events that mark the beginning of the end times. The picture is of Jesus holding a scroll. On the outside of the scroll are 7 wax seals. The breaking of each seal releases a specific and distinct end-time event. That's in Revelation 6:1-2. It says, I watched as the Lamb, Jesus, opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, Come! I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow. He was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. The seals that follow this rider. Number 1, peace is taken away from the earth. Famine follows. Plagues and death follow that. And then persecution and martyrdom of God's people. A great earthquake and the wrath of God. So we see that after the rider appears on the scene, the world essentially free falls into the chaos that defines the last hour. The interpretation that most Bible scholars apply to this passage is that the white horse is an imitation of the white horse that Jesus will ride when he returns, mentioned in Revelation chapter 19. Thus the rider is an imitation Christ, an impostor, an antichrist. The bow without arrows that the rider carries represents a false peace. The rider carries with his rise to power a false promise of peace. This is in alignment with and may be direct reference to the false peace treaty that the Antichrist makes with Israel at the start of the 7-year period of his rule. The crown on his head obviously refers to his position of authority and leadership, and we see that the true motivation of the writer is to conquer. In light of the identity and activity of the writer, then, we are not surprised to find out that the events that follow his emergence onto the world scene do not bring an age of peace, but rather an age of apocalyptic chaos. Apparently, this is not a problem for Islamic scholars, who generally adopt a very arbitrary, pick-and-choose approach to the Bible. For in seeing the Antichrist on the white horse with the crown and conquering, Muslim scholars see a clear picture of the Mahdi. As mentioned earlier regarding the Mahdi, the early Muslim transmitter of hadiths, Kabal Abar, is quoted as saying, "I find the Mahdi recorded in the books of the prophets. For instance, the book of Revelation says, 'And I saw and behold a white horse. He that sat on him went forth conquering and to conquer.'" So in conclusion, we see that several of the most unique and distinguishing aspects of the biblical Antichrist's person, mission, and actions are matched to quite an amazing degree by the descriptions of the Mahdi as found in the Islamic traditions. And now even further, we see that Muslim scholars actually apply Bible verses about the Antichrist to their awaited savior, the Mahdi. This must be seen as quite ironic, if not entirely prophetic. Okay, I'm going to end this video here. After the emergence or the rising of the Mahdi, the second most important event among the major signs is the return of Jesus Christ. Christians who love Jesus understandably get quite excited by the prospect that Muslims look for and long for his return. Unfortunately, the Islamic belief of just who this Jesus is that is coming and what he does once he has arrived is drastically different than what Christians believe about Jesus. So we will see what the Muslim interpretation of Jesus is in my next video. So stay tuned for that, and thanks very much for watching.